The very first election in which there were presidential campaign websites was the year that President Bill Clinton was running for re-election. He had beaten, of course, a sitting president in 1992 to win his first term. And then in 1996, he was running for his second term. And he was running against the grand old man of the Republican Party. And I do not mean that in a negative way about Senator Bob Dole's age. I mean it in the sense that he was the household name of his party. He was the eminence grise, right? He was the trusted, widely respected Republican of all Republicans. He had been a leader in his party for decades. Bob Dole was not seen as a maverick who liked to buck his party the way that John McCain was sometimes seen. Bob Dole was not seen as a moderate. Bob Dole was not seen as bucking his party really in any way. He was the guy who stood for the Republican Party. He was essentially what it meant to be a Republican. He was a conservative. He had led his party's legislative agenda as the Republicans' top man in the Senate for a decade. But that presidential election in 1996 did debut this wacky new way of reaching the kids out there. The first ever campaign websites. And you can tell when you look back at the archive version of these websites that the campaigns are sort of excited to show how hip they are with the new internet web machine site thing. But you can also tell that they don't really have any idea what they should be using this for or what's neat about it. From the press release announcing the Clinton campaign's awesome website, it says it has a couple of innovative features for those of you who are familiar with the internet and the World Wide Web. It's not very common to have this kind of ticker, it says, with a changing message at the bottom, constantly moving, or to have a server pushing new pictures onto the page with regularity. Right to your own computer. Right to your own computer. This is not that long ago, but it really does feel like the beginning of time in some ways. I mean, the Dole Kemp site from that year is still up live. You can still go there right now. It's dolekemp96.org. You can journey back to the days when inbox was 2 words. But nowhere is it more clear that this is really the beginning of time, that so much has changed since the first web campaign ever, that when you look at what these guys were actually running on, you look at the issues page, right? I mean, this is the Republican Party from 1996, their presidential ticket, what they felt like they could brag to the country about in terms of their positions on stuff. So here's Bob Dole bragging about his support for the Safe Drinking Water Act and the Clean Water Act and the Endangered Species Act and the Clean Air Act. Here's him bragging about securing full funding for the Violence Against Women Act and all the money that he got for daycare for mothers who want to work but need help caring for their children. Here he is bragging about the instrumental role that he played in extending the Voting Rights Act. And of course, his signature issue is the Americans with Disabilities Act. Stumbling across the Dole Kemp campaign website, which is still live from 1996, finding that it is still there online right now, like a time capsule, that realization for me today was almost as amazing as realizing how impossible it would be to call this a Republican campaign website today. I mean, there's Dole and Kemp bragging about their instrumental role in passing the Clean Water Act. Republicans in the last Congress passed legislation to essentially get rid of the Clean Water Act. And there's Bob Dole bragging about leading the fight for fully funding the Violence Against Women Act. Well, we didn't have a Violence Against Women Act in effect for part of the last year because Republicans in the last Congress were not sure they were for it anymore. Most of them still voted against it. Bob Dole ran for president in 1996 as the Republican who radically expanded the food stamp program. Republicans all over the country in every state where they're in control right now are cutting food stamps. They're trying to cut them federally. The evils of food stamps are central to the whole Republican narrative of what's wrong with America today. This was not that long ago, but one of the 2 major parties in the United States has changed so much so rapidly that when you talk policy, there's no way to know this was the Republican Party. There has been an unrecognizable change in the party over the course of less than 20 years.
I've worked on the food stamp program proudly, and the WIC program and the school lunch program.
I have learned in my own life, from my own experience, that not every man, woman, or child can make it on their own. And that in time of need, the bridge between failure and success can be the government itself.
That was him accepting the nomination. The bridge between success and failure can be government itself. How far do you think that sacrilege would go in today's Republican Party? Fox News over the weekend aired a new extensive interview that they've just done with Bob Dole.
Could people like Bob Dole, even Ronald Reagan, could you make it in today's Republican Party?
I doubt it. And Reagan couldn't have made it. Certainly Nixon couldn't have made it because he had ideas. And we might have made it, but I doubt it.
On the right, the reaction to those comments from Bob Dole has been that they tell you all you need to know about that old squish, Bob Dole. Too moderate, right? But what's important here is not just that he said it, and so it's somebody who's in a party delivering a critique to his own party, right? That's always exciting when it happens. But the important thing, I think, here is that it's kind of quantifiably true. You can prove what he's saying there because the history of Bob Dole as the standard bearer for his party is not that long ago. It is even online. And he is right that his policies from less than 20 years ago, as a conservative leading his party, are in many ways anathema to what his party stands for today. And that says something that I think is important about American politics, which is maybe too big of an issue to focus on. It's an issue of framing because we never talk about it. It is the context in which we operate rather than the thing that's happening newly each day that you can report on. But over the course of a very short period of time, one of the two parties in American politics has really changed a lot, has shifted very far away from its previous self, and in the process has abandoned a lot of the policies that it used to openly espouse. Is that a done deal? Is that irreversible? Is that process still underway? Is it slowing down? This past December, Bob Dole was back on the floor of the Senate, where he had been the Republican Party's leader for a very long time. And again, he is retired now. You see him here in a wheelchair. But his time in Congress, his time in the Senate was not so long gone that he was not there among friends. I mean, Bob Dole served alongside a lot of senators who are still there. Harry Reid and John McCain and Pat Leahy and Carl Levin and Dianne Feinstein. I mean, he served alongside a lot of people who are still in the Senate. Bob Dole did not serve with the current senior senator from Kansas, Pat Roberts, but he was a lifelong mentor to Pat Roberts. Quoting from the Wichita Eagle, Pat Roberts, who first met Dole decades ago when Dole was in Congress and Roberts was a Marine. Pat Roberts calls Bob Dole the great man and spent years calling himself Dole's bucket toter. Pat Roberts is the man whom Elizabeth Dole calls every time her husband is hospitalized. Pat Roberts will oversee Bob Dole's funeral arrangements when the time comes. They're very, very close. And that day on the Senate floor, the reason Bob Dole was there at the Senate was because the Senate was voting on something that was very important to him. It was voting on the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, which would take the rules that were established here in this country by Bob Dole's landmark Americans with Disabilities Act, and it would set out those rules as a model for the rest of the world to say, we did this here and it works for us. This should be emulated elsewhere. We believe it could work elsewhere the way it worked here, and it would be an advance for human rights. And while Bob Dole sat there and they all greeted him and walked past him in order to cast their vote, 38 Republican senators voted against it. And it failed. And among those voting no was the current senior senator from Kansas, the man who has been Bob Dole's friend for decades, the man who's close enough to Bob Dole that, according to the local press, he is the man who will oversee Bob Dole's funeral when he dies. Pat Roberts walked past him that day and voted no on this UN treaty to expand the Americans with Disabilities Act to be a model for the world. He voted no because the Republican Party has changed that much. Is this forever? And where does this end?